Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Shane Plays Out of the Abyss Notes series, where I give a summary of taking my intrepid party of players through Out of the Abyss, which is the D&D 5th edition Underdark adventure, at my friendly local game store. Now, this for new viewers, I always like to put out a reminder or a point to say that this is not an actual play. This is not a blow-by-blow of every little thing that happens. What this is I summarize, usually weekly, the session that I've most recently had with my players. And I try to hit the high points and talk about, running the adventure, D&D rules, my thoughts as a dungeon master. I try to be pretty transparent, show, the warts and all. So, and if you're a returning viewer, thank you so much. I really appreciate the views and the comments that this series gets, and it, I continually get feedback that it's helpful, which is why I keep doing it. So anyway, having said all that, let's jump right in. And this is Easter Sunday when I'm recording this. So if you are like me and you are a believer in Christ, then he is risen. He is risen indeed. If you do not believe that way, that, I hope you enjoyed Easter, however you celebrate it, if you celebrate it. So that being said, let's plug right in to viewer feedback. So I'm going to take and put my +3 spectacles of viewer feedback on, and we'll see what we can see here. So first viewer feedback we had was from Paul Jackson, who had last video, he had sent in some comments about Antimagic field. I'm like, well, I'm not quite sure that works that way, but let me go research. And upon researching, he was right. And I said, upon further research, Paul is right. And he wrote back in and said, words I'm always happy to hear. It happens so rarely. So, like I said, welcome to Shane Plays, where all of your dreams come true. Now, Paul went on to say, since anti-magic fields only suppress magic, and I'm spending a lot of time on anti-magic field in viewer feedback and in the comments. One, because it's one of those D&D rules that can be a little crazy, but it's also important for Out of the Abyss, because at one point, if everything goes the way the adventure is written, you're going to fight a beholder, and a tough beholder. And one of its main things is it's got that anti-magic zone, field, whatever, that it shoots out of its eye. It's a cone. So, for D&D in general, but also for Out of the Abyss, I think it's important to, keep clarifying this, as long as that there's good commentary to have. So he said, since anti-magic fields only suppress magic, I suspect that they don't break a caster's concentration. Now, where this came from, where I was talking in a recent video, I can't remember exactly which one it was, about whether Bless, because Bless is a concentration spell, if I remember correctly. So if you cast Bless on, I think however many targets, 3 or 4 targets that you can do with Bless, and then you get an anti-magic field on you as the caster, and it requires concentration to keep the anti-magic, or to keep the Bless up, the spell up. Just take Bless out of it, whatever spell it is. If there's a target that requires concentration, say Flight, Bless, whatever, and then you get anti-magic field on you, but the recipient of the spell, Bless, Flight, whatever, is outside of the anti-magic field. So, Paul is saying it doesn't break a caster's concentration. Right. Anti-magic field does not break your concentration, but is there sort of a hidden dotted line for like Bless or Flight or whatever, that if you get anti-magic field thrown on the caster and they're doing concentration to keep the spell up, does the recipient lose the benefit of the spell effect while anti-magic field is on the caster, even though the recipient is outside of the zone of the anti-magic field? So, and I think Paul and I are both in agreement that no, they don't, because it doesn't break concentration, and the magical effect is actually on the target that is outside of the anti-magic field, and there's not as far as we know, like a beam of magic going from the caster to the recipient, the target. Now there may be some unusual cases where a spell specifically says that, there's like a ray maintained in between the caster and the target or something like that. But in this case, I'm going to say no. You can have anti-magic field thrown on the caster who is concentrating, but as long as the target is outside of the anti-magic field, they will still receive the benefits of that magical effect. Now, of course, if the anti-magic field is on the recipient of the effect, of course, they would lose that spell, or that while they're in the zone of effect of the anti-magic field. Now, it's a lot more complicated than that. Make sure to go read up on anti-magic field, because this is one of those spells or effects or whatever that can be used and abused on purpose or just completely misunderstood. So there you go. But anyway, as Paul put it, he said a blur spell, self-concentration 1 minute, would be suppressed in anti-magic field because that's a target of self. But as long as the caster maintains concentration, it would still be in effect once they leave the field, minus any time they spent in the middle. And that's true in the field, and that's true based on how anti-magic field is written. If this is right, and I think it is, Paul, then it follows that as long as a caster is in an anti-magic field maintains concentration, the parts of the spell that are outside of the field will continue to function. Again, I agree. So if the cleric is concentrating on Bless when they're caught in an anti-magic field, the Blessed character outside the field would still benefit from the spell. Right. Seems like the anti-magic field should, and quote-unquote, break the link between the caster and the effect somehow, but that's not how it works. That's not how it's written. Remember, sometimes, and I say this a lot, D&D and a lot of role-playing games, they're game systems. They're not intended to be real-life simulators, if magic was real life, right? Sometimes it's just, those are how the rules work. It's a game engine. I'm not certain, though. It's definitely a question for Mr. Crawford. He's talking about Jeremy Crawford from D&D, the main rules guy. I think, Paul, you're right. So there you go. Now, and speaking of Jeremy Crawford, I'm working with Wizards of the Coast right now. I'm going to do a interview on my show with Jeremy Crawford, and I think somebody else for the Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes book that's coming out in May. So be on the lookout for that. Now, and then Paul also mentions, he says, oh, and rules as written, a creature cannot choose to fail the save for Zone of Truth, but allowing characters to do so makes a lot of sense. And he says, thanks for the videos. You're welcome, Paul. So again, Paul is right. As written, rules as written, there's nothing. And if you can go out there and, search sage advice and the people that do D&D, their answers and stuff like that. It is true. You cannot willingly choose to fail a saving throw by the rules. I think that as DM, I'm going to house rule that, and except in certain circumstances, I'm going to say that, yeah, you could choose. I'm not going to try to resist whatever's happening. I'm just going to let it happen. And so don't force a saving throw on me. So like, for example, if you're not trying to dodge an effect, like if somebody throws a fireball at you or breathes fire at you or whatever, you could chew for whatever reason. You could say, I'm not going to try to get out of the way. And then why would you get a saving throw to take half damage? It just doesn't make sense. Same thing with Zone of Truth. Like if somebody willingly is like, I want to tell the truth. I'm not going to try to mentally resist this. Just let it happen. Then I'm not going to give them a saving throw. If they say I don't want to resist, then I'm not going to give them a saving throw. Now there may be times where I could say, like for example, if it's something that seems to be like a willpower based thing, I could say, well, you could just choose not to save. But maybe it's like a charisma thing, and that's just the force of personality. So like, even though like I don't want to resist this Zone of Truth, the force of their personality does be like, I have to resist. That's just who I am. So maybe I'll give them a saving throw, but say, okay, you have to do a saving throw, but with disadvantage. I don't know. More than likely, I'll probably say you don't have to do a saving throw. You can just let the effect go into place. But I want to give myself enough, leeway to kind of, for each situation. But yeah, I don't know. Sometimes it's rules as written, and then sometimes it's rules as intended. I used to think RAI meant rules as interpreted, but it's rules as intended. Even the designers of D&D will tell you that many times what is written does not always end up as what is intended, especially when, millions of people start playing this game and start looking at it with different eyes, right? So, Paul, thanks for your continued comments. Okay, and then let's see. Vasily, or Vasily. I think I got it right the second time there. I always have to think of Manili from Manili. Vasily, he said, side adventures add a lot of personality to your campaign. I added a couple of side quests for one of my players in Out of the Abyss, and everyone loved it. So, yeah, in last video and this video, again, this is a homebrewed subplot that is not in the book. They go back to Gauntlgrym to have to deal with the fallout from one of the player's actions. So, if you're watching this, again, remember that this last video and this video are like almost complete. Well, they are. It's complete homebrew, really. It doesn't mean that there aren't, some good stuff you can get out of it for, running your campaign or whatever. Now, that's it for the viewer feedback. We relied on viewer feedback this week, but I did want to comment on a couple of other things that came up in our most recent session. One, a character, not a player, a character being drunk, sloppy drunk, played a role in what happened in this most recent session. And they had stated in the previous session that they were going into this session drunk. They had stated that. So, and then I had said, I said, King Bruenor warns all of you because they were going into a meeting with the drow in the official throne room, and it was very serious. And King Bruenor had said, if any of y'all make the situation worse, I'll just execute you. Because at that point he's going from being an adventurer and acquaintance to I'm a king and I have to take care of my kingdom. And so the player had said, well, I already said I was going to be drunk and, I may do stupid stuff. I'm like, okay. So anyway, one of the things that came out of the game discussion wise last session was that King Bruenor had his clerics cast greater restoration on everybody. And it was part of that, we're saying that madness caused the incident and is a mitigating circumstance. So I'm casting greater restoration on everybody to make sure that nobody has any madness. And one, he honestly wanted to make sure nobody had any madness. But two, he's like, this is it. This is your get out of jail free card. From this point forward, whatever you do is on you. And they still, the party, the guild, and the player in question still suffered, consequences. Watch last video if you want to know more. It was not a scot-free kind of situation. So the question came up: does greater restoration or lesser restoration remove the effects of being drunk? And this is a question that has been in D&D for a long time. But it's the first time that it's come up for D&D 5e in one of my games. So I went and looked. Best I can tell, and I'd love to hear all of your thoughts on this, there's no official rules on getting drunk in D&D 5e. And maybe they're out there, and I just couldn't find them. I looked around. And normally, instead of going to the Dungeon Master's Guide or the Player's Handbook, which you think would be the best place to go, normally you go do a search online, and people will talk about it, and they'll say, well, it's in the Player's Handbook, or it's in the Dungeon Master's Guide, or whatever. And that's usually where I start. And then I'll, dig into the books or whatever. But everybody that I could see basically was saying that they don't, D&D 5e doesn't really seem to have rules, and they're house ruling everything. They're home brewing everything. No pun intended. Well, a little bit intended. So I think that's an oversight, because characters quaffing a tankard of ale, or having a bit of wine or whatever, some mead, is as old as the game itself.
What's that? This, my friend, is a pint. It comes in paints?
Oh.
I can get you one.
And it comes up fairly often, like, well, I've had a few, is that going to affect my saving throws or my, attacks or, whatever. And I know that, like, way earlier in the campaign, like during part 1, one of my characters developed one of the characters in the party, not my characters, developed a madness, like an indefinite madness where they always wanted to be drunk. They only felt good when they were drunk. And so we came up with you're always a disadvantage fighting and stuff like that. But there's not really good rules in, I'm drinking, I'm getting progressively drunk, do I get exhaustion, whatever. And can I cure drunkenness? So you have to house rule it if you want to. So let's take a look at lesser restoration and greater restoration. Lesser restoration says you touch a creature and can end either one disease or one condition affecting it. The condition can be blinded, deafened, paralyzed, or poisoned. And we'll come back to that. And then greater restoration says you imbue a creature you touch with positive energy to undo a debilitating effect. You can reduce the target's exhaustion level by 1, or end one of the following effects on the target. One effect that charmed or petrified the target. One curse, including the target's attunement to a cursed magic item. Any reduction to one of the target's ability scores, or one effect reducing the target's hit point maximum. And that's all greater restoration does. Like, to me, I think that greater restoration should do everything that lesser restoration does, plus the stuff that greater restoration does, but it doesn't. So, fine. So let's go back to lesser restoration. What it comes down to, and we had discussion of this in our party, or our group last week, like in the real world, alcohol's a poison. Really, it's a poison. You're poisoning yourself on a certain level. And although the side effects of it can be pleasant to a point, it's a type of poison. It's a slow poison. I mean, you're not going to drink it and die unless you just drink a lot or you're allergic or something. But really what it comes down to, if lesser restoration can get rid of drunkenness or not, is it's a poison or not. So, but I really think that D&D 5e should have basic rules for drinking. I mean, to me, again, that seems like an oversight, because it's going to come up like in almost every game. I mean, it's just how it is. I mean, or let's find the tavern. I'm going to have a few. I mean, it's a trope as old as the game itself. So to leave that out, I don't know. Maybe they were trying to stay out of areas, sticky wickets with people arguing over what is drinking good or bad or da-da-da-da-da. But if you're going to wade into the gender issue, wade right on into the drunken issue, I say. But anyway, that's a topic for another time. So anyway, I ruled that on the fly. I said, maybe later we'll do it differently, but I'm going to say no lesser restoration or greater restoration does not get rid of drunkenness. So, that's just how I ruled. So, maybe I would do it different. Maybe I'm like, maybe I should have ruled differently. I don't know. Be curious to see how you rule on it. So the other thing I want to talk about before we get into the main recap, and this is sort of a viewer feedback kind of thing, but it didn't come up through viewer feedback. I did remove one of my players from the group. And it's actually one of my players I like. I like all my players, okay? So, but I just want to say I have nothing personal against this person. I like them. They're fun. They're actually a brother of one of my players. And they were there at the beginning, and then they had to leave and come back due to school. I let them back in, and we made room for them and all of that. But one of the guidelines at our table is, especially since we play at a store and there are occasionally people say, hey, do you have your room in your game? And I have to say no, is if you miss multiple sessions, there's a couple of things. If you just stop coming all of a sudden, A, I need communication. B, it's going to come down to, why are you not coming? Are you not coming because your work schedule's changed? Did you have to go out of town? Are you sick? Is it unavoidable life, family, or work stuff? And if it's unavoidable work, family, life stuff, and you're communicating with me, then we will be flexible to a point. Now, if you're like, look, I can't come for 6 months, I'm sorry. I mean, sometimes work happens, right? Or whatever. Or I'm going on a trip or whatever. If you're gone for an extended amount of time, I can't necessarily guarantee I'll maintain that seat for you. It'll happen. It'll depend on what happens that intervening time. Have other people come in, whatever the variables are. But I'll try to work with you. If you're like, look, I got to be gone for a month, I have no control over it. Like, yeah, I'll keep your seat open, right? Because we know when it starts, we know when it ends, and it's, but I'd say about a month is probably about as long as I'm going to go, because I do see D&D as a group activity, and, the DM is working with your character and the other players are depending on your character, and you need to know what's going on in the overall game and story and all of this stuff. And again, we play at a store. So, and I do get it, and my standard response right now, because we have had 8 players, was I'm full. So I'm not going to keep your seat open if you're just not showing up. Now, I had a player a few months back that missed 2 or 3 games, and the feedback I got was that they just felt like they would stay home that night. And that was, I'm like, okay. So, I very specifically said, you need to start coming, or, you're going to lose your spot. And they started coming. And then the next time that I awarded, and this was like 2 or 3 weeks they missed. And then the next time I awarded XP, they only got 75% of the XP. They got docked 25% because they weren't there the whole time. And I thought that was fair enough. And then since then, they've made a point of coming, and they like being part of the game. And like, they missed a couple of weeks ago and they were sick, and, they were like, man, I was like, no, it is cool. I got word you were sick and we're good. It's not about missing. It's about, why are you missing? And are you communicating with me? But anyway, so this player who I like, suddenly, decided to just stop coming. And other people in the group weren't getting like, I'm not coming or whatever, just wasn't coming. And I sent some messages to the player. I know in a format that I know that they would receive the messages, and said, hey, we're missing you. Let me know if something's going on, but if you keep missing, I'm going to have to drop you. And I said, it's not personal. I like you, but that's kind of the rule for the group, to keep it fair for everybody. I didn't hear anything for like a week. They still didn't show up. So after the 3rd session, or may have been the 4th, and I still hadn't heard anything, and the people that know them hadn't heard anything, I removed them from the group. And I made sure that the group knew, and I said, look, it's not personal, but this is the expectation for the group. And then I sent that person a message and said, hey, again, nothing personal, but this is kind of the expectation for the group, and you no longer have a seat in the game. And I said, but let me know, I said, if there's like life or work or something going on, talk to me, and we'll see. But as of right now, since I'm not hearing anything, you no longer have a seat. And they did finally communicate back a few days later and said, yeah, it's just crazy, and I can't guarantee that I can commit, and And that's okay, fair enough. And they said, hey, sorry it took me so long to respond. I said, no problem. So depending on how things go in the future, if they want to come back in, I may let them back in, depending on how big the group is. But right now they can't come back because we're already too big. And the way that I do things is, if you were a part of the group before, and then like you have to move, like this player went to school for a year or two, and they came back, and I said, well, you're a founding member of the group, so I'll make room for you. If you're a founding member of the group, and there's a few people that are, there's like 5-6 people I consider founders, you can leave for any amount of time once, and I will bring you back in. But then after that, the normal rules kind of fall on you. And that's what happened with this guy. He got his free entry back in after being gone for well over a year, almost 2 years maybe. Let them back in. They were, took the time, worked their character in, came up with their character, backstory, blah, 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 and then they just suddenly stopped coming. So, and I don't know if this is the case or not. And again, I like this person. It's not personal, but I heard that they got a girlfriend. So, they're like, whoa, and that's where their fascination and interest is, and that's fine. But anyway, just, I like to share my thoughts as a DM and how I do things as a DM, and that's one of the things I do. And nobody seemed upset. Everybody seemed to understand, and it also helped reinforce that's the expectation. There's a couple of expectations I have at the table with D&D as a group activity. There's a social compact, unwritten social rules, or maybe even written social rules. One is, it is your responsibility to know what's going on in the story. If you're just showing up and you're not paying attention to the story, and you're like, well, I don't know what happened last week, or I don't know what's going on with that character, that I am not happy with that. And in fact, I've got a thing we do in the game that I've talked about before that encourages people to pay attention. And I've had one player say, well, I work and I'm in other D&D games and all that. And I'm like, that's not my problem. If you're at this table, you're expected to engage. You're not just here to roll dice because somebody is here too. I don't like that. The other thing I expect is to show up and communicate, because that's just a respect thing. So there you go. So that's kind of viewer feedback. We had the two items there about drunkenness and greater restoration and lesser restoration that weren't technically, or they weren't viewer feedback, but I felt it kind of fit in well with there. And then I also wanted to talk about that. So, and maybe other people out there are stricter or less strict than I am. If it's a home group, if I'm meeting with my friends and we've had a year, a D&D campaign or whatever that's been going for years, and a buddy of mine can't come for a while, I'm going to treat it differently than up at a store, because I'm playing at the store under kind of different, I'm helping the story. I'm playing with players I may not normally play with in my other life. I'm going out of my way to try to accommodate people for the store and that kind of thing. And it's, and really what it comes down to on that is there are people that want, do you have room? No. And if I have to tell people I don't have room in the group, but then you're not showing up, that's really what it comes down to. So again, if I was playing in a living room at home with my buddies, it would probably be a different approach. But anyway, that's it for viewer feedback. So let's get into what happened in this crazy drow meeting in the throne room of Gauntlgrym. Take off my +3 spectacles of viewer feedback. All right. So again, this is part 2 of a homebrew subplot. It took 2 sessions to go through it. To give a really quick overview, one of the players months ago in Mantle Dareth had done something very spontaneous and, in my opinion, very unwise, and had taken the gem that had the demon lord in it and purposefully touched the leader of the drow in Mantle Dareth after they knew that, that this gem caused madness. And there was a big, what? And it caused a problem then. And the player did some clever negotiations to postpone the vengeance of the house, the personal vengeance on that player for a year, because she's thinking that'll give me time to get out of the Underdark. But what you have to remember, there's personal vengeance of the house, and then there's the diplomatic issues with Menzoberranzan, and there's madness in the Underdark. So things are crazy. They're already kind of very shaky, and the Underdark isn't the most stable places to begin with. And so what I decided to do was to use this as an opportunity to A, have a fun subplot, but B, make the point as clearly as I possibly could in game that your actions have consequences. And when you're playing a serious campaign like the Demon Lords running around in the Underdark, and it could potentially threaten the entire prime material plane, or at least all the Forgotten Realms on the surface or whatever, it's not the time for tomfoolery. It's not the time for that idiot kind of stuff. And we had a situation kind of like this a little bit in White Plume Mountain, where I had introduced negative consequences and also done some stuff to kind of say, let's try to take this more seriously. Same player. Well, there's actually 2 players that tend to do weird stuff. And one of those players had a very severe consequences again tonight. But this player specifically, a different player that had touched the drow with the gem and all that. I was just trying to make the point that, this isn't a whimsical, silly story. I mean, this is really important stuff. So it had caused diplomatic problems for King Bruenor because the drow and the duergar and all these races that are in the Underdark, they don't want the surface dwarves in Gauntlgrym. And anything they can use to pressure them back out, they're going to. So it had caused massive problems for King Bruenor. And he's like, I need you guys back here as soon as you can. So eventually the party made it back. And last session, they had a very serious series of 3 meetings where they tried to get to the bottom of everything that was going on and what has been going on with your expedition. And are you still fit to run this expedition? What the heck happened? All this stuff. And as a result of that, the offending player, their character, was punished fairly severely by King Bruenor by saying, once this adventure is over, you can never come to Gauntlgrym, and all of the rewards that were promised your character as part of, they were supposed to get land in Gauntlgrym and money, and you're not going to get that now. And then I also forgot to mention last time that the guild, the guild that they're part of, that's a story device, but it's also more than that, narrative device, but it's also more than that. They were like, okay, and I forgot to mention last time, they talked to the character once everything was said and done, and says, you're also going to face discipline from the guild, and there will be formal proceedings when you return, but more than likely you'll lose a couple of steps of seniority. And you'll probably have to forfeit a higher percentage of your gold and gold piece equivalent of magical items and stuff you find in your adventures for a while. But you're not going to be kicked out or anything like that. And then because there were things that came out last session that the guild and King Bruenor and all of the different factions, they're using as basically cover. One being perhaps even though everybody knows this wasn't the case, perhaps the player or the character, I'm trying to separate the character from the player, perhaps the character, the Moon Elf Warlock, was suffering madness when she did what she did. Even though she used Mage Hand, she never actually touched the gem. But the Underdark, madness is around, so perhaps she was suffering madness. The other thing is, how do we know that the story that's being told by the drow and the way they're doing everything isn't because there's madness in the Underdark? So they use those two things as cover. And, the party had brought back news that was incredibly damaging to Menzoberranzan, was that it was the Archmage of Menzoberranzan that was duped into casting the spell, and Lolth took advantage of it, and blah, 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 blah. And now the Demon Lords are running around. So it's the Drow's fault. So that was a huge piece of diplomatic ammunition for Bruenor. So all those things brought into play, it didn't go as bad as it could have. Even though the player, after they were basically begged not to lie, still lied to King Bruenor, and that's why he forfeited all of her, rights to rewards from the adventure, and you can't come to Gauntlgrym after this is over. You can't come. And he, and through certain ways, he tried to express that this is what I have to do as a king, as an adventurer and as somewhat of an acquaintance now. I understand to a point, but as a king, I have to do these things as a king. And then also the guild now owes Gauntlgrym one. So anyway, so there's all this stuff. But anyway, so the player, they even said, I think something I forgot to mention last time at the end of the meetings was that they said, I'll go with the drow if it'll make things better. And, that was pretty respectable. It showed that they understood the seriousness. And King Bruenor was like, I appreciate the offer, but it won't help at this point because you're just an excuse at this point to put leverage on me. He said, you'll still have that personal vengeance that you have to deal with. But, it's really beyond you now. If I handed you over, it wouldn't take things down there because it's all been an excuse. This is the first domino fell over, and they're making sure as many other dominoes fall over as they can. So everybody's happy, out of game, in game, fun role playing session. We had 2 sessions last, the session before that I just recapped and this session that I'm about to recap were pure RP. And not only were they pure RP, they were homebrew. So it was a little bit different for us, and we had fun, and I had fun doing it. I wouldn't want to homebrew all the time because, as I've said before, I don't have time to purely homebrew. But it was nice. It was nice. Okay, so at the end of last session, King Bruenor had said, "Okay, we're leaving." He gave his pronouncement after they had a couple of meetings, then they slept overnight, and then they met again, and he said, "Okay, I gave my pronouncements. Here's how we're going to do things." And he's like, "Now we've got to go. We're going immediately from here to the throne room," because they were in some official chambers, but not the throne room. And he said, "We're going to the throne room. You have to come. I wish that I didn't have to bring you, but the drow have demanded you be there. Because even though we did everything, is like all these different, the Zentarum and the Emerald Enclave and the Order of the Gauntlet and the Harpers, all these factions supposedly were working with you to do this expedition. Enough circumstantial evidence can be put forward by the drow to link it all to me, even though I did my best to keep, some buffer up, some diplomatic buffer. But, the case can be made because it was all done from Gauntlgrym. And, we all know that I called you here initially. But we've got to go in there. They've demanded you be there because you were all there when the offending incident happened. And he says, as a king, he's like, I cannot stress enough. When we go in there, my kingdom is at stake. Literally, we are on the razor's edge, the edge of a sword on all-out war in the Underdark, in the middle of all this madness and demon lords we're having to deal with. My kingdom, my people are at stake. And if any of you do anything to disrupt this meeting or to make it worse, I will execute you. As a king, I have to. And they were like, okay. And that one player was like, oh, I'm drunk. I'm like, everyone's like, okay. And then, so they went in and, there's the formal court. And then, there's the crier. King Bruenor is now, on the throne, and he sits on the throne. And that's that throne that, the Dwarven god, I think Moradin, I think is his name. It's kind of a special throne that you can't set on that throne unless you're like loyal to the dwarves, and he's got that sphere, that metal sphere ball thing that I came up with last session that I took from the Klingons in Star Trek: The Undiscovered Country. Was it the Undiscovered Country? They're like, Chung, and that's like their gavel, and it comes into session. And every major house of Menzoberranzan, the drow, have sent a contingent. There's like a representative and their entourage. And with House Bonray, which is the lead house of the drow of Menzoberranzan, is, what is her name? The lady that got touched. I had her name written down here. Anyway, she was, even though her last name is not Bonray, she was working for the Bonray house when she was heading up things at Mantle Dareth. It's like Cyrilak Mazalor, I think, is her name. I had it written down here, and for some reason, I can't see it now. But anyway, so there's a couple of things, like they go in there, basically the royal court is in session. All the factions are there. Security, the royal guards are there. Clerics are there. Advisors are there. Sages are there. All of the, the Emerald Enclave, the Zentarum, the Heart, all those factions they work with to make the expedition. The representatives are there. The king's there. It's a big, 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 big deal. And the fact that Menzoberranzan sent representatives from every major house shows A, how serious it is, and B, all these houses are working together. And that's a big deal because there's a lot of infighting among the houses, among the drow at Menzoberranzan. So, so they get in there. Another thing I want to mention, because there's all these different languages and everything, Comprehend Languages was cast on the royal throne room. So everybody can hear, understand what's being said. Yeah, it's Sirach Mazalor. She's with House Bonray. And when the characters walk in with King Bruenor and all that, like she's just staring daggers at Elif, the Moon Elf Warlock, the one that did it to her. She just stared. And all the drow, they're like, that's them, and all of this. So, this is a super serious meeting. I don't think I could have done anything more really that would have, I guess I could have just for hours and hours explained how serious it was. But I dropped a lot of knowledge and narrative and hints. This is a big deal. This is really, really serious. I don't know how much more you go. Like if Bruenor says, if you make this worse, I will execute you as king. So anyway, King Bruenor's like, okay, my drow, guests, and it's all very fake friendly diplomacy and all that. He's showing diplomacy and tact as a king. He's like, thank you for your patience as we have waited for the witnesses and da-da-da-da. And he's like, let us now proceed. So please. And then like the representative of House Bonray steps forward, and she's not the leader of House, but she's like you have like a smooth speaker, a representative, somebody, almost like a lawyer. She's there representing the Bonray, but there's more important people than her in the Bonray contingent, but she's doing the speaking. And she comes out and she goes, this is obviously very serious. And, an egregious insult, has been done by, your agents and all this. And she steps out, and the player who said, well, I've been drunk, he just goes, hi, and waves at her. And she stops, and she's like looking around. She looks at the king. She looks at her people. She looks back, and she's like, I don't, king, I don't, was that an insult? What was it? Was that an insult? What, and the drow are like, what was that? And it's like, what was this? What? Was that an insult? I don't understand. Whatever it was, it seemed to be lacking in respect. Seemed to be impudent. And, I looked over the player and I was like, okay, so I'm trying to let that one pass, because the drow, what was that? Was that and King Bruenor's like, flames and lightning in his eyebrows, he's like, I can't, And so then after she says her things like, this lower life form and all of this stuff, please control your witnesses. Then the player has the character go, well, that was a fine how do you do? Like, that was very nice or something like that. And I'm like, okay. Then the drow representative is like, okay, King Bruenor, and makes the case that disrespect, this is very serious matters, da-da-da. And King Bruenor's like, I agree. He's like, what compensation would you like? And the drow says, I would like her hand. This is a female human monk. I want her hand. But, because, so, and Bruenor's like, fair enough. And, has a stone kind of, almost like what you would put an anvil on or something, brought out into the middle of the courtroom or the royal court. And, asked the monks, will you submit? And the monk's like, oh, okay. And the player says she's so drunk, doesn't really understand what's going on. Said, sure. So they go out there, and one royal guard ties some rope around her right hand, the hand that she waved with, and drags it across the stone and is like pulling the rope. And then, the Yeshua, the female monk, human monk, gets on her knees, and she's kind of like, bent over. And then there's like 4 royal guards just right there waiting to, attack if things get out of hand. And then it almost looks like an executioner comes in with a huge axe. And I asked the player, do you do anything? And they're like, nope. And I said, boom, down comes the axe, and you've lost your hand. And the player's like, okay. And then I was like, and now a cleric steps forward, because the cleric's going to heal the stump, right, to keep death from occurring. And the player said, well, I guess at this point I realized what's going, so I attacked the guards. And I said, okay. I said, well, we can do this one of 2 ways. I said, we can play this out round by round, but you're going to die. Or we can just say you're dead. And, because there's like 4 guards right on them. There's other guards around the room. None of the party, and I asked the party, I said, is anybody doing anything? And the entire party was like, nope, no. They just stood there. They obviously were not going to intervene. I said, we can play this out if you want, but you're going to die. And, and I was also thinking, if they're saying they're that drunk, they're going to be a disadvantage on everything and, all that. I probably wouldn't let them spend key points. We didn't get into all that, but so, anyway, so there was that. And then, King Bruenor said, we'll take an hour recess and then we will resume. So they took a recess, and, everything was cleaned up, and the body was, taken and to be given to, and it was given to the players later. And there's a monk from the same order that's in the party that made sure that, people knew how to deal with the body. And there was Proctor Gamble, I love that name, who is the cleric, one of the main founding members of the guild, that was there as the guild representative, not as a party member, was like, we'll make sure it's all taken care of. But anyway, so I looked at the player and I said, out of character. I said, this is out of character. I said, what did you think was going to happen? And they're like, I don't know. It just, wow. And I mean, nobody at the table said anything. I mean, everyone's like, whatever. And nobody's upset. There's no sympathy for this player. And this player will now be on character 5, I think, not for the Out of the Abyss campaign, but since our group has started, I think they've lost 4 or 5 characters to a death of some sort. Now, I think it's possible because they had been talking with me that they wanted to bring another character in. And I'm really like down. I'm like, for Out of the Abyss, because before, I don't know if you can hear my cats are hissing over there. Before, I guess they're upset that the character died. Before, when we were playing Lost Mine of Phandelver, and to a certain extent when we were playing White Plume Mountain, I was letting new characters come in and out fairly often. I said, for Out of the Abyss, we're clamping down. Pick a character and stick with it. You only get a new character if there's a new story reason, a good story reason, including the character dying, but there could be other reasons. I said, but if I think somebody is suiciding a character so they can get another character in, then, you'll probably set out for a couple of weeks, right? Because I really don't like that kind of thing. So it's possible, because this player had been talking with me about, like wanting to bring in like a character they used to play and wanting to bring them back in, and like, hey, as long as we're at Gauntlgrym, can I bring another character in? Because there's that group of guild characters that are camped outside of Gauntlgrym, and it's kind of loosely defined, and that's how we can bring in new characters from the guild if we need to. It's like I said, it's one of the narrative devices of our ongoing overall group and campaign and all that, to kind of help explain where do these new characters come from. And the guild also, provides other services, but they have to forfeit like 30% of their gold and stuff for it. But they get a guild hall and reputation and all this other stuff. Support, reinforcements. They can store it like, hey, the guild's armory has Black Razor, but if we ever need it, we can ask for it. That kind of thing. And he was like, I don't know what I thought was going to happen. And the reason that I didn't think he was suiciding, even though he didn't want to bring that other character in, in his eyes, Now, maybe he was just doing really good and fooling me, but in his eyes, he seemed genuinely kind of surprised at what was going on. And then he was kind of like, well, I'm a monk, and they just chopped off my hand, and I'm going to go for him. And it seemed legit. So I'm giving the player the benefit of a doubt. But then they were like, I was going to bring that other character, but now I'm looking at the Hexblade in Xander. And I said, no. You wanted to bring that other character. We said you could bring them in after your character died. Now you're not doing a switcheroo and bringing in yet another new character. So there's always that one player, and this player is my player in the group who always wants to keep pushing. So this time I just went, nope. So anyway, on with that. The point is, and we talked about it a little bit after the session, and we talked about it a little bit in the next session, that nobody at the table has sympathy for that character dying. They're just like, whatever, we're not intervening. That's on them, whatever. Because, it was clear as a bell how serious the situation was. And even the fellow monk in the party that is of the same order, that's kind of their backstory. They're in the same order. When the new monk came in, they were part of the existing monk's order and all this. They were sisters. There was some drinking and celebrating after everything was said and done. And they refused to drink out of respect for their fallen comrade. And I said, well, was it out of respect for that character specifically, or was it out of respect that they were part of your order? And they said no comment. So it's just one of those things that everybody in the group was like, whatever, we're going to let this happen. We're not, no tears shed here. So anyway, but the players, come back in with this other replacement character, which is interesting because that character is a drow biologically, but was raised by wood elves. And so there had to be some interesting negotiation, and booze was involved, and King Bruenor was in a good mood after everything had happened, once everything was said and done, and said, okay, you can bring this drow in through Gauntlgrym to go with you into the party, and we'll put the word out that they're okay. Because they look like a drow, and they have the innate abilities of a drow, but they basically talk and live and act like a wood elf. So anyway, after that, they reconvene, and everything's cleaned up just back to like it was, and then they just proceed as if nothing ever happened. They come back after like an hour, and they keep going with the throne room meeting. And so there was, after that, that drow speaker, and she does get the hand. They give her the hand, and she keeps that hand, as a token of she got what she wanted, and that somebody had insulted her and the drow in the room and all that, in House Bonray. So she makes this big accusatory speech, demands that Gauntlgrym, remove itself from the Underdark. Because Gauntlgrym was an old dwarven kingdom in the Underdark that the surface dwarves lost or something. And I can't remember exactly. And then gray dwarves and other creatures had taken it over. And then King Bruenor led the dwarves back in to reclaim it. And so now the surface dwarves have Gauntlgrym again. They have a foothold in the Underdark. And the Underdark don't like that. So they're using this as an excuse. The drow want them out, to the point they'd probably go to war about it. But they're hoping to do this to unify all the various races in the Underdark and put enough pressure on Bruenor to just withdraw on his own. So anyway, they make a big speech, and you don't even deserve to be here. You're a disease in the Underdark. We've had enough. And now you've done this major, grievous diplomatic insult to House Bonray and all drow and Menzoberranzan itself. You must withdraw. So then the rogue player after that, and what I did was, I specifically told the players at certain points, I would say, are you going to do anything or say anything? And they were like, no, we're just listening. And I said, okay. I said, no, this isn't a movie. Even though there's a lot of narrative going on here, I don't want to feel like you're just watching a movie. So at different times I say, do you want to do anything? Do you have any thoughts? So I wanted them to feel like they can interact here if they wanted, but they were respecting what King Bruenor had asked, right? They were role-playing it that way. Now I got to the point where the drow finished, and all the drow were like, "Rrr," and so she stepped back, had made her statements, and the rogue player, the new the player, he's an existing player in the group, but Grimy got disintegrated. The dwarven rogue got disintegrated by the beholders. So there's a new player or a new character who is a very smooth-tongued rogue, much more of a fast talker kind of rogue than just a straight-up rogue. Even though they have roguish abilities, they're a con artist, but they pretend to be a lord, and they have forged documents to be a bastard royalty and all this stuff. Bastard in the sense of like the royalty. If you were born out of wedlock, even if your parents or your father or whatever was royal, you weren't full royalty. You were like a bastard. But in some cultures and societies, you still had certain privileges. So he's like, "May I talk, King?" And King Bruenor said, "Yes," but he looked at him like, but this character had demonstrated in the previous session that they were very good at navigating the royal court situations, very diplomatic. So they sort of cross-examined this drow that was making all the accusations. And what I did was they kept going and kept going and kept going and asking really good questions. Isn't there madness in the Underdark? How do we know that that drow's, Cyrillac Mazalor's testimony is accurate? And is it possible they were mad? And asking all these really good questions that came out from the previous session. And what I did was I had the rogue make persuasion rolls. I gave them 3 persuasion rolls, and I'm thinking, maybe 2 out of 3, or if they get all 3 right or whatever. But and they're not persuading the person that they're cross-examining, that drow representative. It's the room. It's the drow in the room, the whole room. And so as they're making points, and every now and then the player would score a really good point, and the representative was like, "One moment," and they would run back and confer with the Bonray contingent, and I would have the rogue player make a persuasion check. And I'm going to do this 3 different times. And they got I think I established the DC at 15, and they got a 16, an 11, and a 21. So twice, they persuaded the room, and the last one was, better than a 20. So, they did really good. So I figured, that ending on a 20 or above was enough, that the room was now softened up. And then the bard player came in, and the drow or the rogue was like, we call him Lord Fancy Pants or Little Lord Fauntleroy. I can't remember off the top of my head what his name is. I think he has fake names he goes by. It's really, this player always has super creative characters. But anyway, so they step back, and then the bard asked the king, "May I speak?" And King Bruenor said, "Yes, you may." And then the bard stepped up and was like, "Blah, blah, blah," and made this huge and passionate speech, and also delivered the coup de grace about the fact that it was the drow, that we know that it was the drow that caused this whole problem. The archmages of Menzoberranzan, who was of House Banray, it was Grumf Banray, caused all this. They cast a spell, and they were manipulated by Loth and all that, and they're the ones who caused this whole problem with all the madness and the demon lords. And even though he didn't have evidence, I let him do I said, "Okay, give me a performance roll." And instead of a persuasion, I did a performance, because he's performing, right? And he's performing. And he rolled a natural 20, which, as I understand it, on skill checks, I don't think a natural 20 or a 1, I don't think 1 is automatically a critical fumble or 20 is an automatically success. But when he rolled a 20, rolled the best he could possibly roll. And I think he gets like plus 11 on performance or whatever. So he did like a 31. And I mean, that room was sold. And the drow were like, "Oh, crap." And at that point, and he's like, "Da-da," and it was like his greatest moment as a bard. Light is shining off of him. And it was like the scene from A Few Good Men where, Tom Cruise finally cracks Jack Nicholson and all that. It was perfect. I couldn't have asked for a better, I didn't plan it, but he's like, rolled a 20. It was perfect. And at that point, King Bruenor leaped up, He's like, ah, and he said, you dare to come into my kingdom and accuse me? I mean, he just lost it and just went off on the drow. And he's like, you have one bell, and by bell, like by the stroke of the next clock or whatever, the next hour, to remove you and all of your servants from my kingdom, and any drow that are within sight of any of my guard, their life will be forfeit. Right? I mean, he was just like, get out. And he took that sphere and he's like, bam! And sparks flew off of that throne armrest to the point where it kind of cracked some of that stone. It didn't shatter the throne, but it kind of cracked some of the, and I even share with the player, I was like, like Moradin or that dwarf god was not upset because it's like, that was amazing. That was, the dwarven, yeah. So, and the drow are like, gotta go. So they split. Everything turned out okay. So we had a really fun time doing this homebrew and the subplots. And, we did a little bit of wrapping up, a little bit of finishing up. And Bruenor met with everybody and said, I'm sorry for what has happened. I'm sorry you lost your friend. But, at that moment, I'm a king. And Bruenor has this magic shield that he can pull mugs of beer out of. And he's giving beer to everybody. And they're talking. And the faction reps and the party. And Procter Gamble from the guild rep that showed up from Phandalin, to things were so serious. They're just all talking, and there's relief, and and the monk. That's when the other monk was like, "Well, I'm not going to drink." But anyway, so they talk, and it's affirmed that the party still has the trust to lead the expedition, and Bruenor's like, "I'm sorry, I have to be not just an adventurer at heart, but I'm a king. And, these are dire times." Now, there's some other stuff that we did as wrapping up, but I'm going to save that for next session. In next session, they will be going to the Labyrinth. Vizeron, their drow archmage ally, who wants to destroy Menzoberranzan, is going to send them into the Labyrinth next to look for a Garistro heart, the heart of a Garistro demon, and 6 feathers from 6 different angels. So one feather from 6 different types of angel. So that's what we'll be talking about next. Welcome your thoughts and comments. If you could leave a thumbs up and a comment on this video, that helps me out tremendously. But hope you enjoyed it, and we will catch you next time on Shane Plays.
I'll answer the question. You want answers?
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers?
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth!